The Bonnet Carre Spillway is a flood control apparatus in the lower Mississippi River Valley. Located in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, it releases floodwaters from the Mississippi River into Lake Pontchartrain and subsequently into the Gulf of Mexico. The spillway was built in response to the Great Flood of 1927. Its construction was completed in 1931. Its first opening commenced in 1937. It's opened 14 times thereafter through the present day.
It usually would only open 15, 20, 30 days. All the speckled trout and blue crab out of Lake Pontchartrain would flood in the Mississippi waters, and we'd get a gift out of it.
The most recent opening began on February 27, 2019, when river levels were predicted to rise to minor flood stage in New Orleans.
Instead of threatening the city of New Orleans and the integrity of its levees, the Bonnet Carre is opened.
There are different authorities that make the decision about opening the Bonnet Carre. You know, you have the Corps of Engineers, you have folks in Louisiana, you have folks upriver. Mississippi has never had a say in what happens with the Bonnet Carre.
The Army Corps of Engineers closed the spillway on April 11, 2019, only to reopen it on May 10th. This marks the first time in the spillway's history that it was opened twice in 1 year. The truly detrimental effect of the spillway on the Mississippi Gulf Coast was the drastic, prolonged drop in salinity level. Salinity refers to the salt content that is measurable in a body of water. This graph from the U.S. Geographical Survey shows the noticeable drop between April and June of 2019. The salinity level was at or near 1 part per thousand for more than 14 days. While there is fluctuation on a normal day, the average salinity level is 36 parts per thousand. The sea life is not able to sustain itself with such low numbers. They either leave the area or die. These most recent openings of the spillway have impacted the success of the Gulf Coast seafood industry. There's been a shortage of product, mainly oysters, which has made it difficult for some restaurants to keep the item on their menu. Toronto's Crawfish and Wool Market is just one of the many eateries on the coast with this issue.
When they opened the spillway and all that fresh water went into the Gulf, it did affect, the oyster reefs and that kind of stuff. And so the prices of oysters went up, and it seems to be a little bit harder to get them.
They opened their doors 12 years ago and have suffered through other catastrophic events, including the 2010 BP oil spill.
It has affected us minorly compared to the BP oil spill. And I'm not sure if it was because, we were a younger business then and we're a little more established also, that could play into it. But I do think that it just took a little more time for people to get back to eating shrimp and crab and stuff from our Gulf after the BP oil spill.
Just a short trip over the I-110 bridge, Desport Seafood in Biloxi has experienced similar feats. Since opening 120 years ago, the family-owned business has endured many tragic events with each new generation.
None of the restaurants are busy, nobody's buying stuff, so it just puts a damper on everything. It's always happened before with the fresh water coming down, but not this much fresh water. So this is probably the worst. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's probably the worst that it's been since I've been here. Some problems that occurred in increased prices around here, for example, is the spillway opening. Oysters gallons, wholesale oyster gallons 3 months ago were $50. Now they're closer to $85 to $90, if you can even get them.
While the more established restaurants easily regain their footing, the spillway crisis has profoundly affected many newcomers to the coast's culinary scene. Scott Sutherland, a co-owner of the Blind Tiger chain, opened Raw Oyster Bar in downtown Ocean Springs in April of 2019.
We've just never seen such a drastic effect or have it had the spillway open for such a long period of time. We normally purchase our seafood products locally. We've had to resource oysters from the East Coast, actually, and of course the pricing kind of makes things very difficult. It's hard to relay a value to a guest when you're paying such a premium for your seafood. The name Raw, which it was a play from the raw oysters, and when the oysters just aren't available, or they're feared that they're contaminated, or they're not healthy, It really hurt our business. You could see a decline in the business. So we got away from the raw name and went real quick to something that we know people are a little more acceptable to, as the shrimp factory. I see oysters turning into a luxury item in the future rather than a common item on every menu because of that.
On the south side of Deer Island, oyster farmers Andy and Debbie Fountain struggled to meet their harvest quota.
After 10 days, it essentially killed all of our oysters. This was actually our first calendar year of being in business. February of next year would have been an actual 1 year of having our aquaculture permit and being able to raise oysters. We're very blessed in the Gulf of Mexico as far as how fast we can get an oyster from a seed size to a full-grown oyster that's market size, which is a 2.5 to 3 inch oyster. Here, we can do it in about 7 and 8 months. Up the East Coast, it takes up to about 3 years to get an oyster to a 3-inch size because everything goes dormant in the winters, and over there they have to sink their oysters so that they're not impacted by frozen water. For us, we had 100% mortality. There were a couple of farmers that were able to, they had a few oysters that survived. I think right around the vicinity of maybe 1,000 for 2 farmers. And I knew that there was a spillway, and I knew that occasionally they'd let water out to release water from the Mississippi River so that things wouldn't flood. But other than that, I had no idea that it would impact anything.
As a commissioner, I'd like to know what played the biggest part in the impact to dolphin health. We know that the oysters don't travel. They stay put. They're also very managed.
It's kind of hard beating those pictures of dead dolphin and dead turtles. A turtle and a dolphin get a layer of protective coating on their skin. Every 2 hours they grow this protective layer. They need salt water for this protective coating to come around them. When the protective coating don't grow, next thing you know, something called a freshwater lesion grows. And then next thing you know, another lesion grows and another one. It's not cancer where it's spreading throughout their body. They're just popping up because they don't have the protective layer for them. Eventually they die of infection. If a fish is in too much of a freshwater environment, they leave. So that's what the shrimp's done. They have moved out of the area, and then now the salt salinity is back. They've moved back in. I went from having 49 passengers a trip in July down to 6 people a trip. My cost stayed the same, but I didn't have the income. For our fishermen or shrimpermen, it did mess up shrimping in the area. They had to go the other side of the Mississippi River to come back, which is about a 160-mile hike. They were having to take 4, 5, 8, 10-day trips to be able to make a living.
Many factors are considered by the Mississippi River Commission before the spillway can be opened.
So there's a trigger point that says operate New Madrid. There's a trigger point that says operate Morganza. And there's a trigger point that says operate Bonnet Carre. It's the one that gets triggered the most often. It's also the one floodway that has the most population that it protects. This past high water, we lost a couple and their baby, unborn baby, in the Yazoo backwater area. So that's 3 lives too many. The commission is all about life safety. So when it comes to loss of human life, it's not a question of if we operate. It's if we hit the trigger point, we operate. So in the past, we've had issues with the fresh water impacting the health of oysters. But typically, we really don't hear or see a lot of algal blooms or any other impact to that's discernible from the change in salinity.
The water comes from the Mississippi River. The algae does not affect sea life. Algae affects oysters maybe, but it doesn't affect fish and shrimp and other species. But what does affect what we do have is fresh water, which is a whole different thing. There's 3 different subjects we're talking about. We're talking about fresh water, we're talking about algae, we're talking about bacteria. And all 3 of those things are separate and they get misconstrued.
I don't know if we'll have another extended high water that requires the Bonnet Carre to be open for as long as it has this past high water season. It may be one-off, and then it might become something that we do on a regular basis. And if it's something that we do on a more regular basis, then we're going to have to see how we can handle this in a better way.
I think if I had any advice for the consumer, I would say just make sure you educate yourself on what's going on, and don't just cut off business because you're scared or whatever. And remember that the health department is involved in everything, and they're inspecting to make sure that the food is right or that it's safe to eat. I think that we're resilient. When you look at everything that we've been through over these last 30, 40 years, you can see how we've had our ups and downs, but we always make a comeback.
Everything's fine. We're not going to put anything out there that's harmful to anyone. So but trust me, we want this to be resolved as easily and as soon as everybody else.
I don't really know what the solution is, because opening the spillway serves a purpose. It's keeping areas farther up the Mississippi from flooding, but at the same time, it has had such a massive impact on us down here.
We're a tourism community, and tourism relies on commercial fishing, and commercial fishing relies on tourism. When people come here, they want to eat fresh seafood. They want to get it right out of the water and do that. We got a lot of work to do as a community and as a state and everybody else, and it's going to take nice little documentaries like y'all doing right now to get word out, and just every person counts. Every person getting out there knowing that we're okay. Every one of them count.
It was scary times for, I know, a lot of folks on the coast, and I noticed how it's kind of brought a lot of the restaurateurs together, asking questions and realizing, wow, that this can all go south real quick if we don't take care of things and are aware of the long-term impacts of things like the spillway.